What's next for grades 4 and 5 in Clinton Public Schools? These are 23 minutes of clips condensing over 2 hours of video taken at the final October 1, 2018 meeting of the Ad Hoc Facilities Committee formed by the Clinton Superintendent of Schools and Board of Education Chairman to study closing Pierson School and reconfiguring 4th and 5th grade classes among Joel Elementary School and the Eliot Middle School. The committee of 18, comprised of the Board of Education members, teachers, administrators, and parents, after 5 months of study, vote by secret ballot to express their preferences 1, 2, and 3 among 3 options. A, close Pierson School and move grades 4 and 5 to Joel Elementary School. B, close Pierson and split grades 4 and 5 between Joel Elementary School and Eliot Middle School. Or C, maintain the status quo, keeping Pierson open with only 2 grades and a total of slightly over 200 students. Clearly the question is not if, but when to close Pierson and how to best reorganize the students among the lower and middle schools. Is this urgency expressed due to hundreds of thousands of dollars freed to strengthen educational programming or to improve cost effectiveness of education or to improve property values or to relieve an undue tax burden? No, the urgency is to accommodate special education for such a small remaining number of students if closing Pierson is delayed, and to relieve teacher anxiety about the inevitable closing of Pierson. Why split 4th and 5th grades? Do 11-year-olds really belong in a middle school or on school buses with teenagers? Is this a setup to inflame parents? It is a topic that is not discussed in these clips nor in the portions edited, but it is one that deserves to be more carefully considered. Here is the video.
You want to jump into how we discussed and thought about how do we come to some conversation around what we've discovered, reaching some consensus potentially around what gets shared with the Board of Ed coming out of this committee. As we talked about, we've looked at space, we've looked at finances, we've looked at programming, we've put questions on the table, tried to quantify some things, and last week we laid some of that out and discussed it again. So as Eric and I talked about how do we approach this meeting, we came up with an option to kind of kick off after we discussed and went over what we did last meeting, to jump in to try and come up with a way for this committee to look at the 3 options that are on the table.
Right.
I don't know if you want to talk about it or.
And so what we're going to ask you to do is we came up with ballots with the 3 options that we discussed last meeting. So remember, and it's on the ballot as well. Option A is to go to a pre-K 5 here with a 6 to 8 at Eliot. Option B is to go to a pre-K 4 here with with a 5 to 8 at Eliot. And then option C is the status quo. So what we'd like you to do is to rank order 1, 2, 3 your preference for what you would want to recommend to the Board of Ed in their decision making. Given everything that we've looked at, everything that we've talked about, preserving what makes Clinton Clinton, and having some control over the future of our district so that we can preserve what is important to us, and we can preserve the programming and the priorities that the community has said they want to, that are important to them. And then what we'll do is once you, and you don't have to put your name on this, this is really kind of, an anonymous ballot. Then once you have rank ordered, then we're going to just do a simple tally up on the board, and then that will guide our next steps in terms of how we want to present this to the full board and what that's going to look like and what we think needs to be conveyed. Yeah.
I'm math.
Always go to the math person, the math teacher.
I got 54. So I got 2
2, 14, 2.
here.
I've got,
Yeah.
14.
Yeah.
And then 2. For B, I've got B1 is a 16, B2 is a 2, B3 is a 0, C1 is a 0, C2 is a 2, C3 is a 16.
Do we need a minute? So we need to breathe? It is weird.
It feels really
This feels monumental, so I want to make sure, or monumentous? Monumentous, right? I just want to make sure, yes, right? The English teacher. I have my resources, like, so I just want everyone to sit for a minute and just, it's okay.
We're here, when I look at what came from you guys, you know, and it came out at the last meeting, the idea of the status quo, and I think it's on the sheet of our options, the need that we're gonna revisit. If we don't make a decision, we're gonna have to revisit in the near future. And that's the difficult part, to not make a decision at this point, I think, you know, forces us to revisit. So, go ahead, Sharon.
I was just gonna say that while I somewhat feel that we were kind of led in this direction, we did not pursue every other possibility. So it was not a foregone conclusion at the beginning. And we've had essentially 5 months to get to this point. And I think the community's gonna need longer than that, because they didn't go through the same process, but I'm a very traditional person, I love the history of the town, but I think this is it's going to be a good move for us as a district and then as a town and community.
Well, I think when the original study was done with DRA, you know, that we weren't experiencing the reality of the enrollment coming into the schools. And so at that time, when they presented to the board and produced that report, you know, the projection was there, but we weren't living it yet. And I think in coming into this role and the board really looking at it with where our finances are and then looking at the space in our buildings, we needed to come together and look at it. So we've gotten to here in 5 months' time, right? We see the reality, I think, of certain things and the advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons. There's still a whole bunch of questions and steps in terms of what does this mean, what is the board going to do, and how are they going to act. And as Charlene put out there, I think that's my concern too, and maybe that's our next part of our next conversation, is how do we share this out so that the work that we engaged in to kind of get to this point is shown to those who weren't part of this committee to engage in it. So what are the next steps are maybe the most crucial in terms of how we go about doing this, what we share with the board, what the board ends up deciding, and then how we go from there in terms of if we make the decision, looking at maybe option B. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to make that happen and to preserve who we are and what we are for kids.
Excuse me, Mary, are you going to include a timeline in the presentation? Because as a board member, you're going to need to know all that information.
Yeah, so that's something I want to talk about tonight and
Okay.
get some feedback from this committee, I think, as well. Because I think so if we look at it, there are probably 2 options in terms of timeline, right? One is 1920, and we open the new school year in a new configuration. And that's accelerating the work and making sure that we're committed to doing it right, or 2021. I think I like options, right? I mean, realistically, those are probably our two options. And it's all about that timeline, and to Karen's point, making sure that it's something that we can do properly and correctly, and make sure that we're not rushed into it, right? Where we have to do things partway or not really take into account all of the considerations to make this happen. And I think we're down to two options. And so that, maybe that's something we need to talk a little bit about tonight in terms of what are the, of those two options, what are the pros and cons, right? And what's doable. I have some thoughts about it, but I know as we've talked, there are thoughts that have come out in conversation, so I'm interested in what people's thinking is around that and our timeline. I think there's some recommendation and thought, Mike, that needs to get presented from the committee to the board. And then it is a decision of we're either gonna make it happen in 1920 or we're gonna give ourselves that extra year.
Right.
Would there be some discussion around the advantages, disadvantages of those timelines?
Yeah, and I think I'd like to talk a little bit about that tonight with the committee as well, so that we have some insight to share with the board. There's the doable, right? Can we do it? That's a question. And then there's the should we do it? And what timeline makes the most sense, right? In terms of our community, our school system, our teachers, our staff, the ability to do this the right way for families, for kids, and make sure that we're not losing a step by pushing forward too fast or too slow. And you know, there were a couple of comments made at the last meeting too about waiting too long. So I think there's pros and cons in some ways for both, and we can talk a little bit about that tonight. But first, is it doable? And then secondly, does that allow us to do it the right way in the district? And I think both of those things have to be considered and weighed before we commit to the timeline.
I just think, you know, just when, if we were to split, obviously, the pre-K-4, when I think of 4, I mean, we more or less are probably mostly concerned about the physical move, okay? Our curriculum isn't going to change that much. It's the 5 through 8 that you guys maybe are not as worried about the physical move, but it's the much more, how do we set up this academy model? I think of the 5th grade teachers who are, you know, they teach everything, and now all of a sudden they're thrown into a middle school. That's going to be a huge change for them. And how do you, are you going to departmentalize? How are you going to do it? You know, so speaking from 4th grade and younger, we're going to need the time. We're going to need time to pack up. We're going to need time to kind of get everything set. But curriculumly, I think that's not going to be.
Even structurally, the way you
Exactly.
operate, your specials, it's a culture thing.
Right, it's a culture thing,
Joining
right,
a new school,
right.
but,
I think the middle school is going to have
So the
much
5-8
more
month.
of the change.
and I think that's where even more of the questions are gonna be, right? From parents, from community, is really getting their heads around this model,
Right.
which we spent some time on, and I think that needs to be part of our presentation, is, you know, really sharing our journey with 5-8, that once we, to Karen's point, once we started looking at it, thinking about what are opportunities and what can be exciting about it, but then what are the kind of nagging questions, and what does it really take to be able to create a really great 5-8 model? And I think that's where some of our questions and doubts are, because Dana, you put it really well. I think moving forth over, we've done so much work together, our instructional approaches are very similar.
Mhm.
So that's less of a impact than really looking at what the 5-8 model is.
I would agree with Dana, and I think the other piece of it is that, I mean, we do have the benefit of just recently moving Morgan from one site to the other. So I think in terms of the physical packing and unpacking and how do we get boxes moved from point A to point B, you know, we just been there, done that. So, you know, it'll be a little different, we have to do it at 2 sites, but those kinds of things, getting trucks and all of that, packing, taking, you know, we can learn from that.
Go ahead, Cal.
So I agree in all of the thoughtfulness that needs to go into the change. I do feel like I have to share my apprehension about keeping Pearson open an additional year,
Sure.
just for the
Yeah,
sake
let's
of
talk about it.
special services and intervention. I mean, you know, currently we have a full-time school psychologist at Pearson. We have an SLP there 4 out of 5 days. and a student support center there. So we have a lot of staff supporting the building, and the numbers are going to be that much smaller next year. And I have approximately 40 special ed students moving from Eliot to Morgan. So I have to shift staff around, so if that building continues to be open next year, it's not going to have the level of staffing that it has now. Like, there's not going to be full-time behavioral support. It's not going to be possible to have a full-time school psychologist in that building.
Okay.
So that's just the reality based on the numbers and the needs. And it's challenging to have to, you need these student support centers for really high-need students, but when you're looking at the numbers and really how many kids are in there full-time during the course of the day, and it's 1, 2, to have a program servicing 3, 4, 6 versus, just from a cost perspective, then, that's what happened with the intensive learning program. We ended up saying we're just not having that at Pierson anymore. We're keeping 4th graders at Joel and sending 5th graders to Eliot. I would probably be looking at something like that for student support center. So it compromises your programming because you always want to keep kids with their peers.
Sure.
But it doesn't work from a staffing perspective, just based on the numbers. And next year we have a
Right.
whole lot of
The big
numbers
group
at
is
Morgan.
going to Morgan.
Yeah.
Other thought, yeah, go ahead.
I also,
I'm writing all of them.
we maintained 2 8th grade teams this year, and already there's apprehension to go to 1.5 teams next year. And there's already the discussion who's gonna go. Who's gonna have to go to Morgan, who's gonna get ripped, who has to be adjusted to a different grade level or a different subject. So there's a lot of that already going on in the school. And I'm like, just rip the Band-Aid off and do it. And then let everybody adjust, and then take time after that to adjust to the change and see where we need to tweak things.
I think so.
We're gonna have to
We're gonna have
restructure
to-
teams
we're gonna have
if
to
we wait a
restructure
year,
anyway.
one way or another. So, do a 5 through 8 or 6 through 8, there's gonna be change and then change again in terms of team model and how that's gonna work.
I think there's a similar kind of sentiment at Pierson. I would say that everybody's just kind of holding their breath, like, just make the decision, just tell us what's happening. And I think prolonging it may make it more.
And it's like, when you go for a test and your test keeps getting postponed, you're like, I just want to take the test so I can get on with the rest of my life. It's the same sort of thing, but we want to be mindful. So my thought, one of our ideas was, let's have, it wouldn't be a full, we wouldn't be starting a whole nother process at that point, but let's kind of have that in the back of our minds, that we might come back together at that point to kind of say, where are we, what do we consider, what are we hearing, that kind of thing.
So I do think that work's gonna happen on multiple levels within the buildings, with
Right.
school staff, with administrators, with district staff, as we start to think about what it takes and what the models will look like and all of that. But that ability to bring this group, if you guys are willing to do that, back together to vet and get some feedback and perspectives, because you're part of this because you bring different perspectives. So some of you may be sitting on that work and doing some of the work at the building level with your administrators or as we're planning, but then to bring it back here to get some feedback and some reaction as we think about how we communicate it out and we refine some of the decisions. Because your points are true, we're gonna have to make some decisions about our programming and what we can offer and what it looks like, especially in 5 through 8. Right, 4 is probably not going to change as much, but 5 through 8 and what those models look like, what UA is, what the specials are, how does that work? We're going to have to make some decisions, and some of those may not, be really easy to do, and we're going to want some feedback to know what's important to our teachers, to the community, and not let go of something that people are like, no way, that's a deal breaker for us. So, or to begin to think about it from various perspectives and help move people to say, we see an opportunity and a benefit for us. So if the committee's willing, the ability to call you back together to do some of that programmatic vetting and give some feedback would be helpful, I think.
We also have to be cognizant of the fact of our budgetary process too.
Correct.
I mean, holding this.
We gotta decide.
Yeah.
We gotta decide by,
And
December.
the timeline for
Yes.
this was set up with that,
Right,
with that.
way back when one started.
Right. So by December, we need to know our timeline,
Yes.
because we can't budget without knowing what's happening.
Exactly.
Other thoughts on timeline? I mean, I did hear at the last meeting the kind of just the waiting and wondering and ripping the Band-Aid off. It's almost better for us to move ahead.
I feel like there was also a project of some sort that was gonna make it tricky the following year.
Correct, yeah, that's
The
true.
roofing.
The roofing,
Joel.
so, we have a Joel roof project, and we have an Elliott roof project. The funding for it yet, but both of those are slated for the summer of 2020. So we would be in the building and settled if we do it in 1920. Is there a consensus on this committee that if it's doable and we can be thoughtful and really lay it out, that we should recommend the 1920 year?
I think, last year, if we had stayed with the same personnel, the same administrative team that we had last year through this year, then I think, we would be having a different discussion. But since at Eliot, they already moved, they changed the teaming model already. Some Pearson staff are already at Eliot. Some Pearson administrators has changed already. I think we've kind of stepped into that. We've taken baby steps into the change already. So it's a different conversation than we would be having if those things were not already in place.
Thoughts about that, the statement I made about consensus around timeline? Or let's keep putting pros and cons out there. Like definitely there are some reasons I'm hearing in favor of the 1920. But I also saw a few different looks when I said, can we reach consensus that we're better in trying to look at 1920? If we think from a programmatic perspective, we can make that work and do it well. Because I won't shortchange that. But other thoughts on it, or why we might want to wait an extra year? I'm putting it out there. I want to hear from you guys. You've lived this.
Are there any big ticket changes in terms of curriculum that are going to hit that would sway us one way or the other? And we're doing math now, we can do science units, next year.
So the changes are happening regardless of where the fourth and fifth graders are for next year. Those changes have already begun this year.
This year.
I think the key is if the fifth grade were to move to Elliott next year, the sooner we know that, the better, so that we could start planning programmatically, so that we could start planning out staffing as we consider budgets for next year and materials. Some, for example, just the math program right now, math program materials don't even go to Elliott because the fifth grade is still at Pierson, but yet if we are running fifth grade over there, then we'll have some need at Elliott for materials associated with both number corner and bridges. So there's again, if we're going to make that shift for next year, the sooner the better.
And I think staffing support in terms of our interventionists and coaches and how that'll play out if we make the move. I think knowing sooner is critical, but I don't think it totally impacts the work. It just, we would have to adjust and be thoughtful about it in terms of how we allocate it.
I just a thought I was having about fourth and fifth grade teachers, and it kind of seems like the word on the street is like fourth grade teachers are all excited to go to Joel, and fifth grade teachers are excited to go to Elliott. But just like maybe opening up that conversation that if a teacher who happens to teach fifth grade, like would you kind of get pigeonholed?
Prefer it to be in a self-contained
They're going to
versus,
be, in an upper to middle school model
or an
versus someone
intermediate
who may have options to then teach second grade.
Like I'm a fourth grade teacher, but I would love to teach in this 5-8 intermediate model.
Like that whole process, I don't know if it's.
Or I'm a fifth grade
if it
teacher and
makes
I really
sense
like
for it, or if it makes
the
sense
more
to
so.
say, well,
you're going.
You're going.
And I think that's a
That's a
big
good
picture
point.
mapping,
But,
Kate, when we talked about, one of the things was certification and really looking at everybody's certification, because some of that, it might not, I mean, when we look at our model, but it could come into play.
Yeah. I think if we're focusing on that adaptive change, like having people move because they really are using that model,
Right,
is
right.
gonna help perpetuate the positive.
Anybody have anything else? Thank you for all of your commitment and dedication and objectivity and passion and onward and upward. So go work on your superhero coaches. Giving you homework. And we are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
This presentation researched, written, narrated, and produced by Kirk Carr, the Kirkster. Thank you for watching.